Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Our very close neighbor, Nepal, pops into the news, creates a big controversy. India's diplomacy is brought under question, and then just fades out as fast as it comes in. At the moment when we are having this conversation, there is no big controversy coming out of Nepal. But that doesn't mean something or the other might not come. The Chinese have got a huge footprint in Nepal. Internal politics is not at a very stable position. And of course, the economy has a big question. To discuss this, who better than Lieutenant General Shokin Chauhan, who's going to enlighten us as to we all know where we went wrong with Nepal. What needs to be done to improve the situation with Nepal? Because at the end of it, we cannot survive as a country who has dreams of being a power, a regional power, a superpower, as you would like to call it, without our neighborhood being in our favor. Sir, hello and welcome to the show.
Hi, Adi. Great to see you. It's always such a pleasure
Likewise, sir.
to be a part of your show. I've been a part of your show from the very beginning, from the time you started,
Yes, sir.
and I'm glad that I pop in once in a while. You've grown from leaps and bounds, by leaps and bounds, uh, and you're moving in higher circles. But it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I
Always.
always loved the subject of Nepal for actually two reasons. One is that I have always been with Nepalese, having been born in a Gurkha Rifles regimental center. My first language was Nepali. Then, of course, I got commissioned in the Gurkha Rifles, been with the Gurkha Rifles all my life. And then I had the wonderful privilege of being India's defense advisor to the Indian Embassy in Nepal. While as a military man, normally Indian defense advisors do not get involved in politics of a particular country because we're busy dealing with the national army or the national defense forces. In the case of Nepal, I arrived at a time in 2004 when it was a monarchy. They had just lost King Birendra. His brother Gyanendra had taken over, and there was a lot of talk about Gyanendra at that time, about King Gyanendra. And there was also an ongoing Maoist insurgency.
Hmm.
And the Maoist insurgency was threatening to engulf everybody. It was engulfing the people around, it was engulfing the mainstream parties, it was engulfing the monarchy. And because India is Nepal's closest neighbor, uh, with the most access to the decision making situation in Nepal, we too were getting engulfed. People claimed at that time that the Maoists were linked to our Naxalites, which they could have. They also claimed that we were giving surreptitious weapons assistance to Nepal. Claimed that our Maoists were helping out their Maoists, and there was a whole lot of wild claims that used to come out in the Nepalese media every day. So as a result, I was forced to get involved uh, with the politicians, the local politicians of Nepal at that time, many of whom have now emerged as mainstream leaders in Nepal, including the president Ramchandra Paudel, who's unfortunately ill in New Delhi at AIMS. But the issue was that because I started talking to them and trying to explain the Indian Army's point of view, that we always have supported Nepal, I came to know the workings of the Nepalese political mind. So I would like to sort of tell you, there are three truisms in Nepal. One is the loudest voice, political voice that comes out of Nepal is from Kathmandu. The reason is that all the embassies are in Kathmandu. They are restricted to the valley of Kathmandu and therefore are not allowed by the Nepalese to roam around the rest of Nepal. Maybe on a courtesy visit, they're taken to the Everest region every year by the Nepalese army or the Nepalese foreign ministry. But otherwise, they're restricted to the Kathmandu Valley. So all the inputs or outputs that come, that includes the media, comes from only Kathmandu. Kathmandu is controlled by about 200 odd political families who were brought up by whom? The king, because he was the political power at that time. So these families control the narrative, they control the economy, they control the access to the king. And based on what the king would say, they would sort of move up and down. But if you went into history of these 200 odd families, at least 50 or 60 of the closer families were the Sher Jung Bahadur Ranas, or as they're called, the Jabras in Nepal, who were the descendants of the Juj Shamsher Jung Bahadur Rana, who were the hereditary prime ministers of Nepal. By hereditary means the eldest brother would become the prime minister, then the youngest brother would become the prime minister. And for 150 years, they ruled Nepal like this, with the king being in actually a gilded cage and not having any real power. So it was India, and in fact, the defense attache in 1949-50, who actually opened the gates of the embassy to allow King Tribhuvan, who was an imprisoned king, to come inside the Indian embassy, and then he was flown from there to India, bringing an end to the hereditary rule of the Rana prime ministers. So the dislike for India through these 50 odd families was and has started through there. But because the politics and the power system in Nepal is so insecure, and because India exerts the greatest influence, the power centers there find it easiest when they want to get into news by screaming a lot about India. And that's the narrative we pick up. And we have picked up all our life. When I used to tell the ambassador and the various representatives of our embassy that Kathmandu is not Nepal. Now, amongst all the defense attaches, I was the one that had the access to Nepal. I used to go and pay pension to my soldiers in all parts of Nepal. As a result, I would get the voice of the people in the eastern part of the region, the central part of the region, and the western part of the region. So Nepal is divided either into north, central, and east, or south, middle, and higher reaches, the Himalayan regions, whichever side you take. And each voice is extremely different from the next voice. So there are a number of different movements taking place. But because they are all so close to India, the first thing a politician wants to do if he wants to get noticed is he speaks about India. And that's how the local newspapers, cover him. So it was in this meeting that I have been able to meet Prachanda, who is now the Prime Minister, Baburam Bhattarai, the leadership of the Maoists. I met the leadership of the Nepal Congress when they were coming in, when they were in prison, when they were going out. Met the leadership of the Nepal Communist Party. And the Nepal Communist Party is not an offshoot of the communists of China, as we believe. They are actually an offshoot of the communist movement in India. So they draw their background from our JNU. They've studied in JNU. And their thought process is of our own people. So when you try and when we talk about China and we talk about the communist movement and we talk about how the Nepal Communist parties who have the power now in a allied government or a mixed up government that Prachanda leads, there are a million voices that you hear. But what are the voices telling you? Because if you see the makeup of Prachanda's government, he has his own communist parties and he has the Nepal Congress. And in this mix up, this mixed soup, if you like to call it, you also had the Rapapa, that is the King's Party, the Rashtra Prajatantra Party, which was actually made to prop up the king. So you imagine that in a government like Prachanda's government, who is a communist, he is propped up by the Nepal Congress and the King's Party. So we should be very careful when we, and analyze exactly what we want to have this thing by going through who is propping this guy up, whose ideologies function there. Does any political party have an ideology, or the power is the only ideology? So when you go into the Nepalese foreign ministry, and I've gone into it so many times, and even in fact their army headquarters, the issue that when they make you sit down, there's a waiting room as a DA before you go and meet the chief or whoever you're meeting. In that room, there is King Tribhuvan's quote, which says that Nepal is like a yam between two boulders. The larger boulder is the northern boulder, that is China, and the closer boulder is the southern boulder, that is India. And all they think of themselves is that yam, which can get crushed if these two boulders meet. So, in Nepal's political history or the history of power, they have always moved to whoever was more powerful. Before the British colonized India and the British started the battles of 1814 to 1816 and the Anglo Gurkha Wars, Nepal was fighting Tibet. And in the Treaty of Thapatali, 1758 or 1765, I'm not just missing the date, Nepal, when it lost the battle in Tibet because the emperor from China sent a force into Tibet after Tibet asked the emperor from China to send a force to help them out. Nepal started paying compensation to the emperor in China, in Beijing. And the emperor in China used to refer to the Nepal king as the Wang. That means not as a fellow king, but as someone subordinate to him who pays obeisance to him. And in that Treaty of Thapatali, if you go through it in detail and you read it, the Nepal king pays obeisance and pays tribute to the king in China or the emperor in China. He was to pay every 5 years. Every 5 years, a delegation from Nepal would go to pay obeisance and a tribute to the king in China, to the emperor in China. The Qi dynasty, I think, or the King dynasty was. So that's how the process in Nepal functions. Moment the British came and became a more powerful thing, and the power of the Chinese court declined, two things happened. One, Tibet became more independent and exerted their full independence. And the second is Nepal then started aligning with the British. So by 1858 or so, Nepal was totally aligned with the British. And during the first war of independence in 1858, 1857, 58, the Nepal Rana Prime Minister actually led the forces into India, brought in 20,000, 25,000 Nepalese soldiers to quell the so called mutiny in India. And
Hmm.
for that, post 1857, they were rewarded with the 4 districts of the Tarai, which they had lost during the Anglo Gurkha Wars.
Yeah.
So, the psyche, the political psyche of Nepal is that they move towards where the power is, because all they consider themselves to be, and we must understand this, is a yam between two large boulders. They don't want to get crushed. So that's the reason why we don't understand Nepal. We are only one power center. There are two power centers in Nepal, and he has no option. He can't deal with either. His army may be 100,000 strong, but they can't deal. I mean, two infantry divisions are enough to sort everybody out there. So that's the caution I always put our diplomats. Whenever they've asked me, and they're asking me, and become less and less, because I've now retired from service 5 years ago, and my voice in army circles, especially about Nepal, has reduced as a consequence. But if they were to ask for my advice would be, look at who Nepal is looking at as the power center, the greater power. And if that is the greater power, then they will automatically move towards that power, because they don't want to get squashed.
Wouldn't that get them squashed, sir?
They feel that the greater power will protect them. Actually, this movement of Nepal away from India, when we got independence, and the British colonization finished, Mao made a statement in 5051 that, so China was the palm of the hand, and there were five fingers that they had to reunite, right?
Five fingers of
Of,
Tibet.
of which Tibet was one. The second was Nepal. Third was Bhutan.
The dark.
So when the king heard this, he got extremely insecure about his own independence, and he immediately called India and said, "Look, we need your help." So it's the Indian military training team that went into Nepal in 54, 55, and from 55 to 67, 68, we reorganized the Nepalese army. We had listening posts on the Nepal-Tibet border. And once we lost the 62 war, the leadership or the king in Nepal realized that India could not protect itself. So, how can you protect Nepal? That's the time their leadership started taking a decision
Hmm.
to move away from India and to get back to be a little closer to China, so that China would not take them over as they took over Tibet.
It's interesting that they still want to stick with this particular profile, because at the end of it,
I don't blame
history
them,
say,
Adi. I don't blame
but
them.
I mean,
Because
just
to
a
them,
counter argument.
survival is this is survival as a
Absolutely,
country. Because if he
absolutely.
aligns himself with India, it takes nothing for China to walk in, because we can't
Yeah,
prevent that.
you've got countries like Austria, for that matter, in Europe, which literally put its hands up and said, "Listen, I don't care who's what. I'm not getting into this." And if you look at Austria and its neutrality, it's brought in laurels to that country in terms of development, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of business, in terms of whole lot of things. Haven't the Nepalese ever thought about just saying, "Listen, no way, either here or there"? Uh, what do you say to that, sir? Because of course, I mean, the counter to what I'm saying, and I'll put it out there, is itself is a unpredictable China. So is that the case, or
The issue is that Austria is Europe. The Westphalian concept of nationhood came from there, originated from there. After the Second World War, the borders of Europe have been inviolable, violate, absolutely inviolate. We're in a very, very difficult neighborhood.
yeah, yeah. Point
And
taken, sir.
China is an unpredictable country because of her desire, her clear desire to project power. And to say that power comes from the power of the gun, as Mao said, and because it comes from the power of the gun, our gun must be larger and longer and bigger and stronger. So China has never said we will not use force. They have never said that. So if I was tiny Nepal, sitting on the higher reaches of the Himalayan with a huge army like China on my north, and China has taken over Tibet already, I would be very, 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 very scared myself. So you can't blame them.
Absolutely.
But we talked of repairing Indian
Yes,
Nepalese
that's my next question.
relations.
Yes, sir.
The issue is that unless we understand this background of Nepal, how can we repair this relationship? Because the basis of Nepal's existence is this particular statement by Tribhuvan Shah that we have to balance it.
You're
Our
right. Yeah.
existence depends on our balancing. And if we don't balance, we're actually finished as a country. Once you understand this particular concept, you realize that you can't push them. Second thing, Adi, is that you're not stronger than China. You can offer Nepal no protection. We are getting our troops ready to protect our borders, our Arunachal borders, our Ladakh borders. There's no way that we can now push our army and 4 or 5 divisions, or maybe 2 corps actually, to go and protect Nepal's borders
That
along
too in
her.
the middle of the Himalayas. Oh,
Exactly. So when we can offer no protection, we are not as strong as China. We must understand the insecurity of Nepal. Just this understanding by our leadership that Nepal functions in this manner, every politician has this voice that he wants to scream, will change our narrative in Nepal. From a country determined to have a quid pro quo with Nepal, which Nepal can never give you, if we show this understanding that, look, guys, we understand, yeah, you're important to us because you sit on the Indo-Gangetic plain. Your geography is strategically important to us because you control the access to our heartland. The
yeah.
Indo-Gangetic plain is our heartland. All Nepal's rivers flow into India. So unless we realize that strategically Nepal is important to us, they control the access to our heartland. All the river waters flow into us. Our borders are open, and we need Nepal's cooperation and support to protect our own selves. Because Adi, take a look at who exists on these borders. The marginal communities that are in these borders are themselves very vulnerable, are themselves culturally feel out of the mainland India's narrative, and they can be pushed around.
True.
So we have to understand these issues, Adi, before you look at anything else. Growing as a nation, maturing as a nation is understanding what makes your nation.
It's very wise words, I must say, because when you look at,
I've got gray hair. I guess it gets wiser by the day.
so that doesn't prove anything, sir. It's the experience that counts, sir.
but
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 I
my
mean,
voice is less heard now.
no, no, no,
But
sir.
it
I
doesn't
mean, see,
matter.
this is
I should
something that
continue to talk about, but it's less heard.
I'm gonna, because I'm actually working on a concept where every month I want to visit the neighborhood, uh, and visit it individually with each country, find out what's happening in each country and how we can do stuff. So Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and of course Pakistan is a running game, and Bangladesh. So this is something that I want to do every month. So do 5 shows on the neighborhood, where just keep a track of what's happening around and see what we can learn from it. But so what I learned from your answer to my previous intervention was basically that India cannot be behaving like a hegemon.
Absolutely, yeah.
Uh, that's a, I think, a takeaway, because, and to me that was a bit of an eye opener, because when we get the similar lecture, if I may, from the West, we resist, and we scream, shout, abuse, and get lost in this and that, and all that happens. I can only imagine what the Nepalese would be also feeling, that you've got two hegemons sitting on their heads. Both of them say, "You listen to me,"
Absolutely. Or
and
or I will do this.
or I will do this, or I'll shut your borders. I'll do this. I'll do
Yeah.
that, and the other. So it's quite an interesting thing. So in the past, sometime, especially after the KP Sharma Oli incidents, if I may, uh, I feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, there has been a slight, very slight change in the way that we've handled that. There was no outright recrimination of KP Sharma Oli and stuff like that. The External Affairs Minister was very cautious with his words. A lot of meetings happened at the back end. I think it was handled very carefully. Is that the way to kind of begin to a rapprochement with Nepal,
Of
with
course.
regards to
Of
this
course.
and understanding?
Adi, of course. You see, what are the problems with Nepal? Let- Let's just sort of cover a couple of them. One is our border dispute, the Kali
True.
River, right? That's the one issue that seems to get everyone caught up in that. And it's
Hmm.
actually not a big issue. It's just that the Kali River has changed course, and
Yeah.
the enclaves that have been made now, uh, difference of 400, 500 square kilometers. So I would suggest that if you go to Nepal, go via Pithoragarh. Don't go via Kathmandu. Cross the India-Nepal border at the Kali River, and then see for yourself कि ये कहानी क्या है. What is the story? It's not a big deal. It can be dealt with. That's the first issue. That there are a couple of boundary disputes there. They're small. They're not large. They can be dealt with understanding. If we could sort out the enclave problem with Bangladesh, which
Bangladesh.
was which was much more complicated. Nepal is not a difficult thing. It's not a complicated issue. The second issue was on the sharing of river waters.
Hmm.
The need to prevent the Kosi from flooding our plains and causing so much of problem to India. Right? That's the second dispute we have, the larger dispute. If you take these two disputes and you are able to sort them out in a good relationship situation without militarizing systems, you will not need to fence the Indo Nepal border over the next 20, 30 years. We give free employment to every Nepali in India. Nepal has no industry to talk about, no real employment opportunities, no real educational opportunities. So the marginal communities on Nepal's borders will come to India. And if they come to India and we are able to educate them correctly, they will make sure that these borders exist between us, these open borders, are always left open, and they will not allow the Pakistan or China to use these borders by sending in inimical elements through. So you have your borders, you have border policing, you have trade, you have sharing of waters, you have an understanding of their political systems, you have an understanding of their insecurities, and you'll be able to deal with them in a better manner. That's my take.
I think a lot of people uh, blame Nepal wrongly, if I may, uh, for tolerating the Chinese incursions in the northern part of
Uh,
Nepal.
yeah, yeah.
What else will
China,
they do? What else can the Nepalese do?
they can absolutely do nothing. Today we are blaming Bhutan for saying that China is a
Oh
part
no,
of the problem.
I came out and said that's all nonsense, sir. Right at the
Exactly,
beginning. I
exactly.
mean, I
And that's
was,
what I
I
have
think, one
said
of the,
at, yeah. But
I
I
was
too
one of the
said
few
this
people
when,
initially said that, sir. This is all
yeah,
nonsense.
when PR called me over for the show on Bhutan. I said the same thing,
Yeah.
that these are small countries, these are marginal countries.
And as a matter of fact, Bhutan took a very strong stand. The Chinese wanted to make that thing bilateral. These guys said,
Hmm.
no, it's not bilateral. It's
Exactly, it is
trilateral.
three.
Oh,
Exactly.
please. So
So
that was actually a
our
pro-India
our
stand.
own our own lack of understanding is what creates this problem. And like in
Exactly the
every
endeavor right
media,
here, sir.
we have a media that has absolutely no understanding, which is the reason why I don't come on mainstream media anymore, because the narrative,
Yeah.
when they mix us, when you get a strategic expert, they mix us with a politician whose existence only emerges from the noise he makes. Whereas a defense service officer or a strategic expert will talk about history, geography, and strategy. So, in this noise, we get lost. So, that's the reason
Fantastic.
why I would rather talk to a person like you than talk anywhere else, because I get lost in that noise.
I must say, sir, for me, this was, I mean, although we've spoken about Nepal earlier, but let me say this, this was quite an eye-opener because it actually made me look at it from a little different perspective, I guess.
I'm glad.
Somewhere down the line, I blame myself for it, and I'm going to be very blatantly honest about saying that this video is going to reach hundreds and thousands of people. Then I'm going to say it right here that I don't think I understood what was happening in Nepal, and I kind of have, I would say, 1% of the right direction now, where I'll be able to actually think a little more on this particular front. Sir, I'd like to thank you for
I'm
actually
glad,
putting me
Adi.
on that
I'm glad, Adi. Yeah.
because we always confuse. We want aggression from because we are wanting aggression with ourselves. We want aggression from everyone else, and we forget that they are an entity and a country and um, a whole setup and system with people as good as or as even better than us in some cases. However, they might look for it. At the end of it, we need to be understanding of what they're going through. Then only they'll be understanding of what we are going through. So that's I think
Yeah.
we need to um, not be a hegemon. I think that's the last thing I would say. Sir, excuse me. To my audience, please like and subscribe this video. Share it with people who talk about Nepal. Keep a copy of this every time somebody mentions some nonsense on Twitter. Please paste this video out. People should learn the reality of the relationship between the two countries. As I said in the beginning, it's not unsalvageable, it's not unrepairable. As a matter of fact, the relationships are but damn good. We just need a
Absolutely.
little bit of a
Absolutely.
trust that to
Ab-
be built up.
yeah. Absolutely.
Sir, thank you so much. It's always a
Pleasure.
pleasure learning from you, and
Pleasure.
I'm gonna keep a track with you with regards to the neighborhood. I'll talk offline and set this up because I really want to do an in-depth deep dive on our Indian neighborhood, and that's most important. Till then, sir, Jai Hind.
Thank you and Jai Hind. Thank you.